What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, smash that subscribe button and hit the bell so you don't miss our weekly breakdowns of the big issues shaping America. Today, we're diving into a red-hot topic: the Supreme Court's decision in May 2025 to block parts of President Donald Trump's tough immigration policies. Trump ran on a nationalist platform promising to crack down on illegal immigration, but the court threw a wrench in his plans. Some folks are calling this juristocracy, when judges override the will of the people. Others say the court's just doing its job, protecting the Constitution. And what can Trump do to keep his agenda moving? We're breaking it all down in 6 chapters, starting with what the court actually did. Stick around. This one's going to spark some serious debate. Let's kick things off with the details. On May 16, 2025, the Supreme Court, SCOTUS for short, put a temporary freeze on President Trump's plan to deport a bunch of folks he says are dangerous criminals who crossed the border illegally. Trump was leaning on a really old law from 1798 called the Alien Enemies Act. Yeah, 1798, no joke. This law lets the president deport foreigners labeled as enemies during wartime or national emergencies. Trump's team targeted groups like the Tren de Aragua, a Venezuelan gang, saying these guys are a major threat to our safety. They wanted them out, pronto, no hearings needed. But the Supreme Court said, not so fast. In a 7-2 decision, the justices ruled that even these alleged criminals have the right to challenge their deportation in court. This comes straight from the 5th and 14th Amendments, which say nobody, citizen or not, can be locked up or kicked out without due process. That means a fair shot to go before a judge and make your case. The court said the Alien Enemies Act gives the president power, but it can't trump the Constitution. 2 conservative justices, Samuel Alito and Clarence Thomas, weren't on board. They argued that when national security's at stake, the president needs room to act fast, not get tangled in court battles. For them, gang members don't deserve all this legal fuss. This split vote, 7-4, 2 against, shows the Constitution can be read in different ways, and that's where the fight starts. The ruling didn't kill Trump's deportation plans outright, it just slowed them down, demanding a fair process. But for Trump supporters, that's enough to cry foul. Let's see why. All right, let's talk about why some folks are shouting juristocracy over this. Juristocracy is when judges grab too much power and start messing with what the elected government wants to do. Here's the deal. Trump ran on a nationalist platform in 2024, promising to secure the border and deport criminals who snuck into the country. Millions voted for him because they wanted that tough stance. So, when the Supreme Court steps in and says, "You can't do that yet," it feels like a punch to the gut for those voters. Trump's election was a clear message. People wanted action on immigration. Polls from early 2025, like one from Echelon Insights, showed 54% to 57% of Americans backed stricter policies, including deporting criminals. For Trump's base, this was a mandate, a green light to get tough. So when the court puts the brakes on, it looks like unelected judges are overriding the will of the people. That's textbook juristocracy to them. The fact that the decision wasn't unanimous makes it even hotter. It was 7-2 with Alito and Thomas pushing back, saying the president should have more leeway in a crisis. That split suggests the Constitution could have been interpreted differently, and maybe the majority's ruling has some ideology baked in. If the justices can't agree, are they really just following the law, or are their personal views sneaking in? That's what critics are asking. This isn't the first time the courts clashed with Trump either. In his first term, they slowed down his travel ban and blocked some border wall funding. For his supporters, it's starting to feel like the judiciary's got a vendetta, using legal mumbo-jumbo to stall a popular agenda. They argue that in a democracy, big calls like this should come from elected leaders, not a handful of judges who don't face voters. That's the juristocracy beef. The court's acting like it's in charge, and that's not how America's supposed to work. Now let's flip it and see why others say the Supreme Court was just doing its job, not playing juristocracy. This side argues the decision isn't about politics, it's about protecting the Constitution, plain and simple. The 5th and 14th Amendments say, Nobody gets locked up or deported without due process. That's not just for citizens. It applies to everyone here, even if they're accused of being in a gang like Tren de Aragua. Here's their point. The Supreme Court's whole gig is to stop the government from going too far. If Trump could deport people without giving them a chance to fight back, it'd open the door to some scary stuff. What's to stop the government from rounding up anyone, citizen or not, on shaky grounds? The court's saying, you've got to follow the rules. That's not juristocracy. That's the checks and balances our founding fathers built into the system. They also push back on the idea that the court's ignoring voters. In a democracy, the majority doesn't get to trample everyone's rights just because they won an election. The Constitution protects the little guy too, and the Supreme Court's there to enforce that, no matter who's president. Even if these deportations target criminals, the principle of due process matters. Skip it for one group, and it's easier to skip it for others later. That 7-2 vote? Sure, it wasn't unanimous, but 7 out of 9 justices agreed, including some conservatives. That's a solid majority, not some flimsy power grab. Alito and Thomas dissenting just shows the law can be seen different ways, but most justices thought due process was a must. And this isn't about letting criminals walk free. The court said they can still be deported, just after a fair process. That's not anti-Trump, it's pro-Constitution. Let's zoom out and talk about what this means for democracy. America's all about the people's vote. And in 2024, a ton of folks picked Trump because they wanted him to crack down on illegal immigration. His nationalist agenda, build the wall, deport criminals, put America first, hit home with millions. Those Echelon Insights polls I mentioned showed over half of Americans wanted tougher immigration laws. For Trump's voters, his policies aren't just politics. They're about keeping the country safe. When they hear about gangs like Tren de Aragua causing trouble, they want action, not court delays. So when the Supreme Court says, slow down, you need due process, it can feel like the system's letting them down. They're thinking, we voted for this guy to fix this, and now unelected judges are stopping him. What's the point of elections? That's a real frustration, and it's fueling the juristocracy debate. But democracy is not just about what the majority wants. It's also about protecting everyone's rights, even the unpopular ones. The Constitution sets limits on what any president can do, no matter how many votes they got. That's why we've got the Supreme Court, to make sure nobody goes too far. In this case, they're saying even suspected criminals deserve a fair shot in court. That might rub some folks the wrong way, but it's part of what keeps our system balanced. This push and pull between the will of the people and the rule of law is at the core of the juristocracy argument. Trump's supporters see the court as meddling. Others see it as saving democracy from itself. It's a messy tug of war that's been around since the Constitution was written, and it's not going anywhere. So, where does this leave us? The Supreme Court's decision to block Trump's deportations is just one piece of a bigger puzzle about power, politics, and how America runs. Let's take a step back and look at the whole picture. This isn't the first time the court's tangled with a president's plans. In the 1960s, it pushed for civil rights when a lot of folks weren't ready. In 2015, it legalized same-sex marriage, thrilling some and ticking off others. In 2022, it overturned Roe v. Wade, flipping abortion rights on its head. Every time, people either cried juristocracy or cheered justice, depending on their side. The Supreme Court's always been a big player in America's toughest debates, and it's never going to make everyone happy. What's different now is the insane polarization we're living through. Trust in the Supreme Court is way down. Gallup polls in 2024 showed just 43% of Americans had confidence in it. That's partly because the court's makeup, 6 conservative justices, 3 liberals, feels like a political game. Trump appointed 3 of those conservatives, so it's wild that the court's blocking his policies. It shows even a conservative-leaning court isn't just a yes man for his agenda. This fight's not just American either. Countries like France, Germany, and the UK are wrestling with immigration too, how to balance border control with human rights. The Supreme Court's decision might nudge other nations to think harder about due process. What happens here doesn't stay here, it ripples out. Looking ahead, this ruling's just one battle in a bigger war. Trump's not backing down. He's already asking the court to rethink specific deportation cases, and he's got public support for now. But the court's holding firm, and groups like the ACLU are ready to keep fighting in court. This could drag on for months, maybe years, and it's going to keep stirring up the question of who really runs America. All right, let's get to the big question. What can Trump do to get around the Supreme Court's roadblock and keep his immigration agenda moving? The court's ruling slowed him down, but Trump's got a playbook to push forward. Here are some strategies he might use based on what we've seen and what's being talked about. First, Trump could keep leaning on the Alien Enemies Act. The court didn't say he can't use it. They just said he's got to give people a chance to fight their deportation. So, his team could tweak the process to meet the court's bare minimum, like giving detainees a quick hearing with basic paperwork. They've already tried stuff like this, offering a one-page form in English with just 12 hours to respond. Critics call it unfair, but it might technically check the court's box while still speeding things up. Another move is doubling down on labeling groups as threats. Trump's already called the Tren de Aragua a terrorist organization, which lets him use the Alien Enemies Act to tag their members as enemies. He could expand this, slapping similar labels on other gangs or even broader groups to justify fast-track deportations. The trick is making it stick legally. Courts might push back if the labels seem too flimsy. Trump's also playing the public opinion card. With polls showing over half of Americans want tougher immigration laws, he's got leverage to pressure the court and Congress. He's been vocal on platforms like Truth Social, calling out judges for destroying America. By rallying his base, he can make it politically risky for the court to keep blocking him. Public pressure doesn't change the law, but it can shift the vibe around these decisions. He could also go straight to Congress. If the Republican-controlled Congress passes new immigration laws that streamline deportations or loosen due process rules, it'd give Trump more legal ammo. This is a long shot. Congress is notoriously slow, but it's an option if he can whip up enough support. Then there's the direct approach, asking the Supreme Court for exceptions. Trump's already petitioned the court to let him deport specific groups, like nearly 200 Venezuelans in Texas. If he keeps filing these requests, he might score some wins, especially if the court sees them as narrow enough to avoid setting big precedents. Finally, Trump could use executive actions to test the limits. He's done this before, like with his travel ban in 2017. He might issue new orders that skirt the court's ruling, like redirecting ICE to focus on certain high-profile cases or declaring a national emergency to unlock more powers. These moves would likely face lawsuits, but they'd keep his agenda in the spotlight and buy time. The catch? Every move comes with risks. Pushing too hard could backfire, with more court losses or public backlash. Groups like the ACLU are watching, ready to sue at every turn. And if Trump's seen as ignoring the Constitution, it could hurt his image, even among supporters who want results but respect the rule of law. It's a high-stakes game, and Trump's got to play it smart to keep his immigration promises alive. That's our deep dive into the Supreme Court's immigration ruling, the Juristocracy debate, and Trump's next moves. What do you think? Is the court overreaching, or is it just upholding the law? And can Trump pull off his immigration agenda? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read everyone, and I love hearing from you guys. If this breakdown helped you make sense of things, give us a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe if you haven't already. We've got more big topics coming, so stay tuned. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.